It began with a whisper. A rumor carried on the salt-sprayed winds of the Atlantic. Tales of lands beyond the horizon, rich with gold and spice, had captivated European minds for centuries. But the ocean was a vast, terrifying mystery. It was a barrier, a great unknown. For most, the idea of sailing west to reach the east was a fool's dream, a fantasy for mapmakers and madmen. Yet, in the hearts of a few brave souls, a new kind of courage was taking root. It was an age of daring, an age of questioning. The old maps were no longer enough. The world, they suspected, was much bigger than they had ever imagined. In 1492, an Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus, sailing under the Spanish flag, took that daring leap of faith. With 3 small ships, the Niña, the Pinta, the Santa Maria, he set a course into the vast, uncharted blue. His goal was to find a new trade route to Asia. But destiny had a different plan. After weeks at sea, with his crew near mutiny and hope beginning to fade, a lookout spotted land. It was not Asia. The first footprints in the snow were English. Decades after the initial discoveries, the English sought a permanent presence in North America. In 1607, settlers sailed up a river they named the James for their king. They established Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement. Life was brutally difficult. The colonists faced starvation. They faced disease. They faced conflicts with the Powhatan Confederacy. The starving time of 1609-1610 nearly wiped them out. Yet, they endured. They learned to cultivate tobacco. Tobacco became a cash crop that saved the colony and shaped its future. Further north, another group of English settlers sought something different. They sought religious freedom, not gold. The Pilgrims, separatists from the Church of England, sailed on the Mayflower in 1620. They landed at Plymouth, far north of their intended destination. Before coming ashore, they signed the Mayflower Compact aboard the ship. The compact established self-government based on majority rule. It was a small but revolutionary act. It planted seeds of democracy in the rocky soil of New England. The continent became a patchwork of different cultures and ambitions. The English built colonies along the Atlantic coast. The French established a vast, sparsely populated empire. It reached the icy shores of Canada. It followed the Mississippi River. It extended to the Gulf of Mexico. The French were primarily traders, not farmers. They built forts. They built trading posts. They forged alliances with native tribes through the fur trade. They aimed to control the continent's heartland, forming an arc of French influence that hemmed in English settlements. The Spanish held the southern and western regions. From Florida to California, they established missions. They built presidios, military forts. They aimed to protect claims and convert Native Americans to Catholicism. St. Augustine in Florida became the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement. The Dutch settled the Hudson River Valley, founding New Amsterdam, a bustling trade hub. It would later be seized by the English and renamed New York. Each group brought its own language, its own religion, its own way of life. Together they created a diverse, often contentious colonial mosaic. For over a century and a half, the 13 English colonies grew and prospered. They developed their own distinct identities, their own economies, their own local governments. A new kind of person was emerging, the American. They were fiercely independent, resourceful, accustomed to managing their own affairs. They were loyal subjects of the British Crown, separated by 3,000 miles of ocean. This distance bred a spirit of self-reliance. When Great Britain, deep in debt after a long war with France, began imposing new taxes on the colonies without their consent, the spirit of independence was ignited into a fire of resistance. No taxation without representation. They argued that a distant parliament had no right to tax them without elected representatives. Protests erupted across the colonies. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, the Tea Act. Boycotts, demonstrations, sometimes violence, like the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with force, sending troops to enforce its laws. The tensions culminated in April 1775 on the village green of Lexington, Massachusetts. The shot heard round the world was fired, and the American Revolution had begun. The war for independence was a long and arduous struggle. The colonists were underdogs, a ragtag army of farmers, merchants challenging the most powerful military on earth. They were led by George Washington, a Virginia planter whose steadfast leadership held the Continental Army together through years of defeat, hardship, and brutal winters. The turning point came with the American victory at Saratoga in 1777, which convinced France to join the war as an ally. Finally, in 1781, at Yorktown, Virginia, the main British army was surrounded and forced to surrender. Winning the war was one thing, building a nation was another. The newly independent states were loosely united under a weak government called the Articles of Confederation. It soon became clear that this was not enough to hold the fragile country together. In 1787, delegates met in Philadelphia to create a new framework. The result was the United States Constitution, a brilliant and enduring document that established a strong federal government with a system of checks and balances. It created a republic, a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and set the United States on a course to become a unified and powerful nation. With its independence secured, the young United States looked westward. The vast, untamed continent stretched before it, a land of seemingly endless opportunity. This westward gaze was fueled by an idea that came to be known as manifest destiny. It was the belief the nation was divinely ordained to expand from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This idea captured the American imagination and drove expansion for the next century. It was a dream of land, of freedom, a continental empire built on liberty. The first great leap westward came in 1803. President Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Territory from France. For $15 million, the United States instantly doubled in size. The Louisiana Purchase added a vast swath of land from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. Jefferson sent the Lewis and Clark expedition. For 2 years, Lewis and Clark journeyed across the continent, mapping the land, documenting resources, establishing relations with Native American tribes. They opened the West to future settlement. The pull of the West was irresistible. Pioneers in covered wagons followed the Oregon Trail, seeking fertile farmland. The discovery of gold in California in 1848 triggered the gold rush. Hundreds of thousands of 49ers flocked to California hoping to get rich. Westward movement led to wars, treaties, and land purchases. These added Texas, California, and the entire Southwest. The frontier shaped the American character with individualism, resilience, and constant motion. But this expansion came at a cost. The land settlers saw as empty was home to Native American tribes. The westward push led to decades of conflict, broken treaties, and forced removal onto reservations. The Trail of Tears, the forced march of the Cherokee from the southeast to the west, remains a dark and tragic chapter. Manifest destiny for some meant displacement and devastation for others. A painful contradiction at the heart of America's growth. As the nation expanded westward, a deep and bitter division grew within it. The issue was slavery. In the agricultural South, the economy was built on the labor of millions of enslaved African Americans who worked on vast cotton plantations, tobacco plantations. In the industrializing North, an abolitionist movement was gaining strength, calling for an end to slavery on moral and ethical grounds. Each new state added to the Union threatened to upset the delicate balance of power. Free states, slave states. For decades, political compromises held the nation together, but they were only temporary solutions to an irreconcilable conflict. The breaking point came with the election of Abraham Lincoln as president in 1860. Lincoln and his Republican Party opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. Fearing that their way of life and the institution of slavery were under threat, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. Lincoln declared that the Union was perpetual and could not be dissolved. In April 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War, the bloodiest conflict in American history, had begun. The war raged for 4 long and brutal years. It was a war of brother against brother, Antietam, Gettysburg, Vicksburg. The Union had greater industrial might and a larger population, but the Confederacy fought with fierce determination to defend its homeland. President Lincoln's primary goal was to preserve the Union. But as the war progressed, it evolved into a struggle for human freedom. In 1863, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared that all slaves in the rebellious states were thenceforward and forever free. In the spring of 1865, the Confederate Army surrendered, and the war was over. The Union had been preserved, but at a staggering cost of more than 600,000 lives. The nation was left scarred and devastated, particularly the South. The period that followed, known as Reconstruction, was an attempt to rebuild the South and integrate the newly freed African Americans into society. It was a difficult and often violent era. While slavery was abolished by the 13th Amendment, the promise of true equality remained unfulfilled for another century. Yet, the war had settled a fundamental question. America was not a collection of states, but one indivisible nation. The late 19th and early 20th centuries saw the United States transform at a breathtaking pace. A surge of industrialization turned the nation into a manufacturing powerhouse, fueled by inventions like the telephone and the electric light bulb. Millions of immigrants from Southern Europe poured into the country. Millions of immigrants from Eastern Europe poured into the country. They crowded into burgeoning cities like New York. They crowded into burgeoning cities like Chicago. These immigrants provided the labor that powered factories. They built the railroads. America was becoming a melting pot of cultures, dynamic and energetic, poised for the world stage. It was a time of immense wealth and innovation, but also of growing pains and social inequality. America's industrial might was put to the test in World War I. At first, the nation remained neutral. It hesitated to become entangled in Europe's ancient conflicts. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare escalated the crisis. That policy drew the United States into the war in 1917. Fresh American troops arrived on the battlefields. Vast American industrial resources flowed to the war effort. Together, they helped tip the balance to an Allied victory. America emerged as a major global power. It became a creditor nation whose voice now mattered. President Woodrow Wilson championed a League of Nations. This signaled a more engaged American role in world affairs. The Roaring Twenties, prosperity, and cultural change. Then, in 1929, the stock market crashed. The Great Depression was the worst economic crisis in our history. Millions lost their jobs. Millions lost their homes. A sense of hopelessness gripped the country. FDR's New Deal used government intervention to fight the Depression. Programs created jobs. They established a social safety net. As recovery began, the world plunged into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 unified the country. It launched America into a global war against fascism. World War II completed America's rise to global superpower status. Factories became the arsenal of democracy. They produced ships. They produced planes. They produced tanks. 16 million Americans served in uniform. The war culminated with the atomic bomb. It was developed in secret by the Manhattan Project. When the war ended in 1945, much of Europe and Asia lay in ruins. The United States, by contrast, had an undamaged homeland. It had the world's strongest economy and the most powerful military. The American century had truly begun. In the aftermath of World War II, the United States stood as one of two global superpowers alongside the Soviet Union. This began a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. It was a decades-long struggle for ideological dominance, economic dominance, military dominance that never erupted into direct hot war between the two giants. Instead, it was fought through proxy wars in places like Korea, Vietnam, through an expensive and dangerous nuclear arms race, and through a competition for influence around the globe. America took on the role of leader of the free world, containing communism through NATO, the Marshall Plan, which rebuilt Western Europe. A key front in the Cold War was the race for technological supremacy, the space race. When the Soviets launched the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, it sent a shockwave through America. The nation responded with a massive investment in science and education. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy boldly declared that America would land a man on the moon before the end of the decade. This audacious goal was achieved in July 1969, when Neil Armstrong took his one small step onto the lunar surface. Buzz Aldrin stands on the surface of the moon, with the American flag planted nearby. It was a monumental technological achievement, and a powerful symbol of innovation, determination, and capacity. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Cold War ended. The United States was left as the world's sole superpower. Its military strength was unmatched, with a global network of bases and alliances. The US dollar was the world's primary reserve currency, giving it immense economic leverage. American culture, its movies, music, and brands, spread to every corner of the globe. For a time, it seemed as if American-style democracy and free market capitalism had triumphed. The nation was often referred to as the indispensable nation, the one country whose leadership was considered essential for maintaining global peace and stability. Today, on this first day of October in 2025, America's position as a superpower is defined by several key factors. Its massive economy remains the largest and most innovative in the world, home to technology giants that shape our daily lives. Its military is unparalleled in its reach and technological advancement. The nation's universities and research institutions attract the brightest minds from all over the world. While the world is becoming more multipolar, with new powers rising, the unique combination of America's economic influence, military influence, and cultural influence continues to grant it a central and powerful role in the ongoing story of our world.